I've made and sold a lot of picture frames. Generally, picture frames can come off as kind of boring, but this one was going to be different. And as usual, mistakes were made. But at the end of the day, they were overcome and the star of the show approved.
You like it?
At least I think so. Welcome to the channel, folks. As you may or may not know, alongside my craft of woodworking and furniture making, I'm also a landscape photographer. And for a while I've been toying with the idea of matching epoxy resin with specific pictures I've taken and inlaying it into certain pieces of wood to create like a completed all-around piece of art where the frame and the epoxy color really complements the specific picture. So today, that is just what we're doing. For a project like this, I really wanted a specific piece of wood. I needed something that was just kind of naturally rotted for an area to inlay the epoxy. I've seen people use saw blades to create lines for the epoxy and inlay it into that, but I wanted something more natural and organic to it. And this Wormy Butternut was exactly what I was looking for. I cut the board down to rough lengths and widths before taking them over to the jointer to flatten them. I then planed them down on the opposite side to achieve their final thickness, which ended up being about 1 inch. Now, a little story about this wood. I bought a bunch of this butternut a couple years back, and the hardwood supplier where I bought it actually had it in their quote-unquote rustic pile. And anything in the rustic pile was like 95 cents a board foot. One day, I returned there to pick up some more, and upon checking out, I showed the guy behind the counter a picture of a frame print I built with this. He was visibly pretty impressed with it and really liked how it looked. A couple months later passed and I was at that hardwood dealer again and noticed that that type of wood was not in the rustic pile anymore. It was next to it and it was like $5 a board foot now. Now, I'm not going to say the price was changed because I showed him that picture, but it was just kind of funny. They definitely caught on that it was a little more sought after than they thought. Anyway, I removed the loose, soft, and punky stuff before moving on to build the form for the epoxy. I've done a little bit here and there with epoxy from thin tabletop pours, but never really poured into a mold. I have plans to, but I just haven't yet. I debated on just taping the bottoms and the sides and then pouring into this frame, but just decided a form would be better. I used 1/2-inch MDF for these forms. I then taped it with 3-inch packing tape to prevent the epoxy from sticking. I made a total of 2 forms for the 4 pieces. Brad nailed the form together and then used caulk to seal all the spots where the MDF came together. My plan is to salvage these molds when I take them apart to be used again. After the caulk was dry, I placed the pieces of wood in the mold, which fit like a glove. I leveled a couple of my sawhorses and put the molds on them for the pour. I also used scrap cut-off pieces wrapped in that same packing tape so I could clamp the pieces down to the bottom of the forms. It was then time to match the epoxy. I grabbed the photo of my dog and then a couple of different colors of epoxy tint and started playing around with them until I landed on a color I was happy with. I thought the pink hues in the sky of the photo would be a perfect color to accent the frame with. I started pouring the epoxy into the molds. At first I was just trying to kind of be neat with it and fill all the voids separately, but quickly decided against that and decided it was just best to flood the whole thing and let gravity kind of do its thing naturally. The next day there were a few dried air bubbles on top, which I kind of expected, and I fully expected to take these molds apart and for them to be some voids as well. On a good note though, with scoring the caulk with a razor blade, the molds came apart surprisingly well, and I will definitely be able to use these again. Once they were out of the mold, I took a belt sander and sanded the residual caulk off the bottom of the frame pieces so that they could slide easily through my planer to take off the excess epoxy. After that, I gave them a rough sanding. Since the pieces were stuck together from the epoxy pour, I cut each of them on that same seam to get them back into 2 pieces. I then cut the dado where the glass and print will sit. I find this easiest to do just on my table saw. And then grabbed my table saw picture frame sled and started cutting my 11-inch pieces. Now all was going smoothly until I didn't change my stop on my sled to 14 inches to fit the 11 by 14 print. That I realized about halfway through this cut. So after I shrugged that off, I made an 11 by 11 frame, which I actually really liked the squared look in the end. Now, since miter joints generally need more than just glue to hold them together, I used my domino to do this. There's a million different ways you can do this. I just have a number of the smallest dominoes that came with mine, and it works good for this and pretty much nothing else. So I glued that up with my strap clamp, let it dry for a couple hours. After dry, I sanded the whole thing down with 120 grit. This was going to open up any pockets in the epoxy, which tends to happen. I then took this black wood and grain filler. I'll link exactly what I used below. I have no affiliation with this brand, but I just like the product. And I took that and covered the front and sides of the frame. What this was going to do was fill any of the small voids in the epoxy, as well as give the wood a really cool look when I sand it off, which you'll see right here. When it was dry, I did a final sanding to 180 grit to remove the excess filler, which sands super easily. And as you can see here, after sanding off, the wood filler goes into the grain ever so slightly to give it a really cool aged patina look. I then sprayed on some water-based polyacrylic for the finish and sprayed on about 3 coats of that really lightly. As that was drying, I needed to cut the print down to size due to my mistake, as well as the glass and backer board, which for the backer board I used 1/4 inch plywood for. I like using 1/4 inch plywood as it just looks more professional than, say, like just cardboard. Plus I usually have scraps of it laying around, and I like to put my logo on the back with my engraver. I could then sign the print, put it all together. I'm framing your picture. I'm framing your picture. You got a self-portrait coming. I'll show you in a minute, okay? I used my point driver to hold everything in place. Wonder if this will go into epoxy. Probably not. Let's try it. Not too well. And then I could see what everyone thought about it. What do you think? Old Natal girl. You like it? What do you think?
It's good.
What do you think, T?
Why not him?
I'll have to do one of you. And I think my yellow lab was just pissed it wasn't him in the picture. Now, I know picture frames are generally pretty boring, but I hope I spruced this one up a little bit. It was a really fun one to create from the ground up, from taking the picture a few years back to housing it in a really unique way to display in our home. Hey guys, if you enjoyed that video, I'm pretty sure you'll like this one, and then subscribe for more. Thanks for watching.